Hello and welcome to the President's Podcast, right here on the record with the Ohio Senate. The views the news excludes. I'm John Fortney, the Director of Communication for the Senate Republican Caucus, the Majority Caucus in the Ohio Senate. Our 52nd edition of On the Record with the Ohio Senate, the views the news excludes, and the President's Podcast, we bring back the President for the President's Podcast. Great to have Matt Huffman back on.
Good to be here again, John. I know we've had a lot of great guests over the last year, but it's nice to have a nice one-on-one conversation with you.
Especially on the political outcomes over people campaign, otherwise known as Issue 1, otherwise known as citizens, not politicians. We like to label them with our own label. But the state Supreme Court really upheld what the ballot board passed at the end of August. And I just wanted to read an excerpt of what the Supreme Court said regarding the ballot language. The court said, what these rules require falls within the meaning of gerrymander in describing the Issue 1. They mandate the new commission draw district boundaries that give a political advantage to an identifiable group. And it's all based on proportionality, based on what we've been saying for quite some time. And your thoughts on the Supreme Court opinion and the ballot board language?
Yeah, I mean, specifically on the issue of the word gerrymander, of course, they reference in the opinion what the definition of gerrymandering is, not only what Webster says, but what the United States Supreme Court describes it. So when you draw districts looking for a particular outcome, and actually a particular political outcome, that's what gerrymandering is. And I would say also that the language of this doesn't say Republican and Democrat. It says the first party and the second party, and they make that reference. And I think, we look at things in terms of one side or the other, but the answer is most Ohio voters, I shouldn't say most, but many, and probably more Republicans and Democrats, are independent or view themselves as not party aligned. Now, they may vote more for Republicans and Democrats, but they don't vote exclusively for one party or another. And that voter, which is the largest block of voters in Ohio, is ignored in this particular amendment. And of course, not to leave behind third parties, Libertarian, Green Party, and other third parties that are not mentioned at all in this. So that's the main problem with this. That's exactly what it is. And we have, the current system, the system 2 systems ago had no rules at all. The current system put in restrictions on how the majority can draw the maps. And the one that I'm particularly concerned about is that the population restriction can't be larger or smaller by 5% of the average district, which has been in place since the constitutional changes in the late 60s. That goes away and is only determined by the commission itself, and it's whatever they think is reasonable. And, knowing that these folks aren't elected and also can't be removed except by themselves, their determination of reasonableness is the final decision. You can't file a lawsuit over that. The constitutional amendment also says that. So this is really going to be kind of a free-for-all.
One of the interesting things that we were talking about with some of our recent guests on the podcast, including the Secretary of State, Senator Gavarone, who are both members of the ballot board, election law expert Frank Strigari, was the meltdown that the editorial boards had, really threw a fit when the ballot board passed the original ballot language, and then turned around and contradicted themselves. And I thought it was maybe the beginning of the media and the ed board specifically having to admit to what the plan really does. And the Toledo Blade had an editorial out by its editorial board, and it was titled, "Ballot Board Blows It." But then several paragraphs later says the following: "We have said that there is an element of gerrymandering in the Citizens Not Politicians Amendment. It would manipulate district lines with the goal of producing political balances in the State House, State Senate, and congressional delegation that reflect the state's overall political balance." Again, as the governor said, founded in proportionality, that's the real danger. And as you said, you could have districts that are very large and districts that are very small if you do away with the population requirement. And doesn't that undermine one person, one vote and really dilute the voting strength district to district for small districts.
Yeah, and remember, the reason we were required by the United States Supreme Court to change the way we drew these in the late 60s was we were not a one-person, one-vote state. At that point, every county, no matter how small, was entitled to a state rep. So I think at that time we had 123 state representatives. So we changed it and went to the redistricting system. I think that I think lots of folks who thought we need to change the system are seeing this for that we should change this, but are now discovering this is not the right way to do this. And, essentially the same conversation we had 10 years ago, we started going down this path of let's try to do this differently. And of course, at that point, we had Republicans, Democrats, folks from all over came up with the current system. Which resulted last year in a unanimous bipartisan decision. But it's not the kinds of results that the folks in Washington and internationally who are sponsoring this, that's not the people they want in the Ohio General Assembly. So, there's a lot of other sort of extraordinary things that are in this piece of this amendment. But certainly it requires gerrymandering, and the ballot board and the Supreme Court, I think, got it right.
At the expense of voters, and also minority voters, for that matter. There was an interesting Akron Beacon Journal editorial that really kind of shocked me because this also came out after the original ballot board vote on the language. And it said, in referring to this plan, neither have such states found the approach flawless. For instance, Michigan has struggled with getting black representation right, which struck me as a more than racist statement. I was unaware that there was a right percentage for the black vote, but apparently there is within this plan. And a group of black lawmakers from Michigan and also former State Representative John Barnes held a news conference, I believe it was last week, and their comments were quite striking. In fact, Sherry Gay Donago, who served as a Michigan state representative, was quoted as saying the following: "They cut Detroit up into 22 pieces." And she went on to say, "Well, I will never turn my back on the black community and tell them that poison is good for you. This is poison. Issue 1 is poison because it will diminish and take away black leadership." That's a real danger of this, and they found out from the federal court that they drew their maps the first time based on race, and that's a violation of the Equal Protection Clause.
Yeah, and that's in kind of having gone through this in 2011, working with the various constituency groups and the reforms in 15 and 18, and then the map-making process in 21 and 23. One of the things I learned is that federal law and the federal civil rights law requires in some instances that a majority minority district be drawn. You cannot follow the 1964 Civil Rights Act and do the things that this constitutional provision calls for. The geography, where people live, it doesn't allow that to be done. So clearly the result of this is going to be that black legislators, both in Congress and in the General Assembly, are going to lose their seats. And I think there's a real conversation going on behind the scenes about what is going to happen. And remember, too, the people who are sponsoring this, these are people from progressive left in Washington and internationally, they have a particular political and social agenda. Most black Democrats are social conservatives. Clearly, part of the Democrat Party, but remember, political parties are really factions that form and reform and break away, and and it's the same true as the Republican Party. So ask off the record, so to speak, what a black legislator thinks of this and what they think ought to be done. And they're in a difficult spot because, and I understand that because I've been in same difficult spots before. And I want to just comment a little bit on this issue of factions. So we we had 3 ballot initiatives, one dealing with changing how we amend the Constitution to a 60% vote instead of a 50% vote. And I wanted to do that. That failed. I was against the abortion and marijuana initiatives. Of course, those both passed. And one of the reasons, it's not the only reason, because there were certainly different questions in different constituent groups. For the marijuana, I think there were a lot of Republicans who supported that because many Republicans are more libertarian. But again, there's independents who vote a lot with the Republicans, but not on that issue. But in all 3 of those, the factions that I would see within the Republican Party, they were not united. There were different people, whether it was business community, social conservatives. You could probably list 6 or 8 or 10 factions if you got down to that. In this case, the Republican Party is united against that. They see, from a business standpoint, from a social standpoint, from an educational standpoint, all of those big, important issues, and of course there are many more than that. And, that's why I thought Governor DeWine's press conference, he did an extraordinary job and has done on speaking on this since then, really was sort of the bellwether for everybody to say, okay, this is what the Republican Party is going to do. And so I think it's really helped.
Yeah, we've been calling this a far-left, deep state, D.C., dark money, foreign-funded power grab. 1630 fund, which there was legislation that was passed that outlawed foreign contributions to issue campaigns, something the Federal Elections Commission even sent out a memo back in December of last year saying states should be doing this. Even at the local level, we should be doing this. And then we see all this money pour in. The 1630 fund, which was founded by somebody who is not an American citizen, a Swiss billionaire, $6.6 million coming from their organization in Washington, D.C. Article 4, $2 million from Washington, D.C. Our American Future, $1.5 million from Washington, D.C. And then the Tides Foundation out of San Francisco, $2 million. Almost all of the money in this campaign came from outside of Ohio. What in the world would a San Francisco special interest organization want to have anything to do with the Ohio Constitution and redistricting?
Well, it's the 3 or 4 Republican congressional representatives who are going to go from Republican to Democrat in the U.S. Congress. That's what their main interest is. And the other part, of course, is that Ohio is a big state. It's a wealthy state. We don't think of ourselves that way, but Cleveland is a really one of the great large cities in the Cleveland area. You could look at average incomes. It's much larger than boom cities like Nashville or Austin or places like that. Their studies have shown that. And, so it's important to control these large states that actually affect, I think they probably look at it as a state that can go back to being a purple or state at some point too. So, and of course, because it's easy to change the Constitution in Ohio, that is the way that, and that was sort of our big fight last summer, over 60%. The same people were opposed to that also. I also think that that the state Democratic Party has not weighed in a great deal in helping its candidates get elected. The national folks have helped with congressional folks, but you don't see that with the General Assembly and a lot of the statewide candidates, governor and secretary of state and things like that. So it's really controlled largely by national interests. And those national interests, those Democrats do not have the same ideology as Democrats in Ohio. Now, that's not strictly speaking for everybody, but that's why you see this big change in focus in what they're trying to do.
Yeah, wasn't it also interesting how the NDRC or their lawyer, Mark Elias, the Elias law firm that represents Eric Holder, the National Democratic Redistricting Commission, all of these radical far-left efforts, immediately sued to block the implementation of the foreign funds law, to which I said, in criminal law, you have to get beyond a reasonable doubt. So if you're not using foreign funds, which is the storyline that we all heard, it doesn't happen, it's not being used. If you're not using foreign funds for your $25 million dark money power grab, then why would you have to sue to block a law? Clearly, those foreign funds are important to this campaign.
Well, sure, and they also filed a campaign report at the end of July saying they have spent all of their money because they knew this was supposed to go into effect September 1st. But I don't think that there's any doubt about who's behind it, why they're doing what they're doing. And there's several sort of strange things that are part of this. One of which is this commission, who are going to be folks who we can talk about who's in and who's excluded, but they can spend as much money as they want on attorneys, including Mark Elias Law Firm, consultants, map makers, physical facilities, whatever they choose. The General Assembly has to pay. And that's not true anywhere else. The governor can't do that. The Supreme Court can't do that. Nobody can. Everything has to be approved by the General Assembly.
Like a fourth branch of government that tells the legislature what to do.
Well, it's a fourth, not only for that, but remember that they can't be removed for any reason except by the other members of the commission. They can't, we can impeach the governor, and legislators can get thrown out of office, all sorts of things. But these folks, once they're on this, cannot be removed, and they can get whatever money you want. And remember also, there's a prohibition on directly contacting the members of the commission except through a committee hearing. Well, there may be tens of thousands of people who want to comment on this, and they can't pick up the phone and call the staff. They can't do all of the things you can do with the governor's office or your legislator. How are they going to accommodate these people at a committee hearing? And the answer is, of course, they can't. And so a lot of other strange things in this.
And it really, ironically, removes the voter from the process. If you can't even walk down the hallway or walk down the sidewalk, or maybe the guy that you know at your son or daughter's soccer team, he's part of the independents on the so-called Citizens Commission, and you want to talk to him about, hey, I live in this district and I can't talk to you. That's basically what this says, right?
Right, yeah. Can you make sure that my local village isn't divided up and taken out 3 counties away in another Senate district? I think that's bad. He's like, you have to come to the commission and talk to everybody.
And when the panel dissolves, voters, again, have nowhere to turn to.
That's right. That's what the Constitution will say if this is adopted.
But right now, if you're a member of the redistricting commission, the governor, the secretary of state, the state auditor, 2 members from each party, you can go complain to them. Or if you're a Democrat and you don't like your district, you can join a campaign to try to elect a Democrat to a statewide office, which hasn't happened for quite a while. But that's how the balance of power can change. That is also built into the fairness of you have to have minority party buy-in, which we got in September of 2023 for a unanimous bipartisan rest of the decade set of maps for the GA.
Right. And all of these folks who are involved in this, by the way, we hear from a lot of people, and it's not just generally people calling up. It's local officials. I remember getting a call from somebody that they were upset that the Wapakoneta local school was separated from the city of Wapakoneta. Well, the school is outside the city, and in every district, you got to draw a line someplace. And somebody will say, the line goes right through my neighborhood. My neighbor's on one side, and I'm on the other. Well, the line has to go someplace. But you can call people and ask them about it and say, hey, I saw this map. I think it's no good. A bunch of people in Shelby County are still mad at me because Jim Jordan's no longer their state representative. I hear from it whenever I go there. It's part of my Senate district. So there's all of that. And the main point really here is the question comes down to who is going to make the decisions. And in this case, we have a group of elected folks who are accessible to the public and have staffs who can go out and communicate with people and receive messages. This body is not going to be elected. You can't talk to them. They can spend as much money as they want. They're going to decide what is reasonable. You can't sue over whether what they say is reasonable or not. It says that, okay? And I think of all of these sort of outrageous things that are part of this, the most significant is the people who are excluded, who are not allowed to serve, and it says it in the Constitution. If you are elected, appointed, or were merely a candidate for any office or position at the federal, state, or local level, you're not allowed to be on this commission, nor are your families or your employees or anyone you had a contract with, okay? Now you think about that and you say, well, that could be a lot of people. Well, it could be. For example, United States military officers receive an appointment from the President of the United States, Secretary of Defense, various departments, and those folks, and this is in the 6 years prior to the time of the filing of the map, it's not at the moment, any time in the prior 6 years, they can't be on this. So those military officers are excluded, and their families are, and their employees are. So some employee of his decides, well, I'd like to do this. Through no action of their own, this military, I happen to work for this guy in a company after he retired from the military, I can't be on it. And this guy has a contract with somebody to come in and sell them materials or do whatever, he's out too. Police officers receive a commission, an appointment from the state of Ohio. They are excluded from serving this, and their families, okay? If you're a local appointed official, maybe the mayor appoints you to the Urban Forestry Council or whatever it is, or you happen to be a township trustee, or you're on a local school board, or maybe you ran for the local school board and lost, and because you were a candidate, you're out, and so's your family, and your employees, and anybody you had a contract with. And so when you start thinking about all of these people, some of whom they have nothing to do with why that guy's excluded except my relationship as a family member, an employee, or a contractor, and they're all excluded. Well, you start looking at these concentric circles, how many people is that? Well, it's probably in the millions. And the people who are excluded are the people who are most active in their community. And it may not necessarily be that they're map drawers or understand redistricting, but why should you be excluded? Because you decided nobody else is running for village council and they need people to step up and make decisions for my local village council, so I'm going to do that. And because of your willingness to help your community, you shouldn't be on the commission.
Neither should your family member.
And neither should your family.
Even if you lost.
Yeah, even if you lost. And, you know, I mean, you think about, for example, the appointments I make as a Senate president, and I call people up and I say, hey, I need to appoint, and people agree to be on these various commissions, some of them, the Rare Disease Study Council, and people are very interested in that because they have a child or a relative, and they meet and they make recommendations to the governor and the legislature and the Department of Health. Those people are all excluded, okay, because they receive that appointment at the state level, and their families are excluded, and employees and contractors. The boards of trustees at universities who are appointed by the governor, okay? And again, most of these appointments are at the local level. You can think of people who probably in many cities there might be the mayor appointed a commission to study the diversity efforts that the mayor wants to put forward. Those people are all excluded. So it's not just Republicans they're trying to keep out. They're trying to keep out anybody who apparently is willing to step up and do good for their community. I mean, and when I read through this, and I've had other people say, yeah, that's what that really says, I'm like, well, why would they do this? And I think the answer is the people who drafted this, well, two reasons. One is I think they looked at what happened last year and thought, we can put in whatever we want, yell gerrymander, and pass it. And the other problem is what happens when these things are drafted by just a few people in a dark room, metaphorically, and they put it on the ballot. They don't have the process that the legislature has, where we have many people coming in, we have amendments, Republicans say this, Democrats say that, okay, we need to put this on the ballot with a certain number of votes, and let's get together and put something on that the public is going to support, which is what we did in 2015 and 2018. Instead, this is a bunch of folks in Washington saying, we're going to do what you want, and now you have this Frankenstein monster stomping all over the state of Ohio. I mean, I want to look at them as a part-time political consultant and say, you got to be kidding me. This is what you came up with? So I encourage people to read it and see, oh, under this, I can't be on this. And most people would take the time to read it, probably can't be on the redistricting commission.
And Blue Star and Gold Star families.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Right?
If you're,
that's offensive.
If you happen to be a widow or widower whose spouse was killed in the line of duty in the 6 years prior to the filing of this, you're ineligible to serve. And by the way, so are the members of the family of that slain police officer. And you know, those are, of course, heart-wrenching conclusions to make, but it's all of these other folks involved in their community that don't get to serve.
And also what I thought was very interesting, and I wrote about it in our online newsroom On the Record. You go to ohiosenate.gov, click on News, first drop down, that's On the Record, the views of the news excludes. I screenshotted part of their lawsuit challenging the ballot language. And it actually said that they wanted people, Ohioans, who did not have, quote, a parochial self-interest in how maps were drawn. In other words, we want people who we're suggesting that Ohioans don't have any interest whatsoever in how their political districts are drawn, what they look like, who is representing them, and they don't feel like they have to have a voice. Well, I'd love to see who those people are.
Yeah, well, one thing I've learned since I became Senate President, and kind of knew this when I was in the House, I was the Speaker Pro Tem, is whatever it is that you're doing for the city of Cleveland, the city of Cincinnati is outraged if you don't do it for them. And then the city of Columbus says, well, we're the state capital. And meanwhile, Toledo, Akron, and Dayton are saying we're big cities too. And that's about, 40% of the state, and all the people in Marietta and Sandusky and Lima. So, of course, this is not simply about, let's put it all down on a grid, and that, and it really can't be if we are going to keep delivering services in the way that we do it, which is most services are delivered at the local level. If you're going to divide up counties and have multiple districts, perhaps within a rural county in representation, it's going to be a real problem, because who do people call? Well, they call their state rep if you live in Paulding County, or they call their state senator that represents them to say, why hasn't this happened? Can you go make it happen? We do a lot of policy determination, but most of this job is constituent service. And if those counties and cities and villages are divided up, and of course the communities of interest, which we talked about earlier, so it is going to be a mishmash.
And this is also why the black lawmakers are so concerned about this. And you serve with Representative John Barnes, I believe, in the House.
I did, yeah, that's right.
He was part of the news conference with the state representative from Michigan, and here's what he said. This is a quote. He says, this was from the Toledo Blade story. This is a scheme that is designed to undermine democracy under the guise of reform of gerrymandering. This is likened to individual vigilantism. It's a process of people who are trying to hijack the Ohio voter system for an obvious outcome that is inconsistent with democracy and opportunities for us to build a better tomorrow. He also went on to say, the system that we have right now is fair. It's reflective of one thing: one person, one vote.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what we have in the system, one of the conclusions, or I guess one of the sort of clarifying facts here is, right now there are 26 Republicans and 7 Democrats in the Ohio Senate. There were some changes, and there's a couple more districts that have either gone Democratic or leaned when we did the 23 map, okay? Well, there are probably another 3 or 4 districts that lean Democrat, or clearly Democrats could win. But here's what you have to do to win elections. You have to have a good candidate. You have to have a good organization, either a party or some other group that's working for the candidate, and you have to raise money. And there are a lot of folks who would give these candidates money, like the people who are giving money to these folks. But there's 2 problems with that. One is, well, we're not interested in having 20 Republicans and 13 Democrats. We're not interested in winning 6 seats because we're still way behind. We're not in charge. We want to be in the majority, which this system will allow it to do. And by the way, we're not interested in electing Democrats who aren't going to be beholden to us. We need this Washington leftist agenda. That's what they're trying to accomplish here. So, you know, as you see these seats that have long time been Democratic become Republican, some of those are because demographic changes along, in particular, along the eastern border of Ohio. Those seats were Democratic for many, many years. It started changing actually before Donald Trump ran for president. It really started changing when George Bush in 2004. But those seats have changed, but seats in places like Franklin County, those, and the population's gotten bigger, those have changed to be Democratic seats and Republican. Same thing in Hamilton County. The problem is, if there's a really good candidate who people like Matt Dolan in Cuyahoga County, well, you got to find somebody who can beat Matt Dolan, and that's pretty hard to do. But it's a seat Democrats could have won in the last 2 cycles. We had a good candidate, they didn't, or we had a better candidate, let's put it that way.
Yeah, candidates, campaigns, and issues matter. And of the 15 Senate districts that are indexed Democrat, Republicans have won 8 of those. Candidates, campaigns, and issues matter. It is interesting, again, getting back to the idea that even the newsroom side, not the editorial side, which, you know, went ballistic when the ballot board did what it did, but then said, well, there is an element of gerrymandering to the citizens campaign. Now there was the newsroom side is reporting it. So Cleveland.com, to its credit, interviewed John Aguilla, a Michigan State University professor and redistricting insider who consulted with Michigan's so-called voters panel. He told Cleveland.com, and I'll quote from their story, he says, and in Ohio, the people advancing this proposal are also not proposing that competitiveness be a goal. In addition, he said, emphasizing competitive districts can lead to wild swings in party control, with Republicans or Democrats winning an alarming percentage of seats in a wave year for either party. Well, I kind of thought that that amounts to discounting the voice of the voter then under that plan, because it can be anything. It can be scandal. It can just be a change in the political environment, whatever it be. And if that no longer matters, the voice of the voter doesn't matter either.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point here is when you try to draw districts to get a political outcome or even a legislative outcome, you end up having voters who are disappointed. You end up having these wild swings. And most of this, when you look at the lines that have been in place for decades, the county lines, centuries really, and where folks live, the districts sort of draw themselves. And roughly in the state of Ohio, you're going to draw probably about 50 to 55 districts Republican. You're going to draw 35 to 40 districts Democratic based on the population, and about 10 that are swing districts. And that's where really the races are won, and however many, that's where it's really going to be controlled. And that's determined by the geography, not by saying, well, we can draw elongated districts and change population and ignore local lines and all of that, which is what this does.
And in the same Cleveland.com story, the professor went on to say, if the redistricting measure would pass, there would be an even greater likelihood that this will become a problem. This is about the representation of the black vote and breaking up of those districts, giving the emphasis on drawing a certain number of districts that favor each party. That requirement would put more pressure on Ohio's redistricting commission to draw more Democratic seats than there are now, raising the chances that they will break up black neighborhoods into separate districts like the Michigan ones that were challenged in court. Proportionality, and otherwise, well, we have to gerrymander this percentage. And that's the way it's going to be. When they came out with their new campaign ad this week, which was all about Michigan football highlights of all things, which was odd, didn't say a single thing about how their plan would work. And then I replied on social media and received a firestorm, but here's how I replied to that. So the refs choose the players, the refs decide who wins, and the refs decide who always goes to a bowl game. Fixed outcomes, zero accountability, and the fans, otherwise known as the voters, lose every time.
Yeah, it's one of the things that's happening here is that the discussion about how these districts is at this sort of national political level, and we're only going to talk about what us couple thousand politicos, the people who are involved in this, want. And as I said, most of this is about constituent service. So if you're a legislator from the city of Columbus or any of the big Cincinnati, Cleveland, Toledo, Dayton, you know what this community is, and you know the things that we need to get done. So, and that's why our capital budget is a pretty good example. We look at folks and say, and this was our position certainly in the Senate. I looked at Matt Dolan and I said, look, here's how much money we're going to spend in the greater Cleveland area. I don't care what you do with it. You get together with the Democrats and you all decide what are the right projects. And that's what we'll do in Cleveland. And that's what we'll do in Columbus. All of that has nothing to do with party. They've got the mayors and they've got the county commissioners and all those folks making the influence on it. And in fact, I would say at least 3/4 of what we do legislatively have nothing to do with party and politics. You can see those in the different votes. And as we have on different issues, interests in Republicans who care more about what some of these Democrats think. You look at criminal justice reform, look at marijuana. Well, those are libertarian, Republican-type folks who are saying, I'm agreeing with the Democrats. So it's not always about party all the time, and that's what this disregards. For these folks who are sponsoring this, it's only about party and power, and that power being controlled by people on a national and international basis.
So when you go to the ballot, you'll see this language. The proposed amendment would repeal constitutional protections against gerrymandering approved by nearly 3/4 of Ohio electors participating in the statewide elections in 2015 and 2018. That's correct.
That is correct.
It was 70% on Article 11 and 75% on Article 19, which deals with the congressional mapping process. 2, establish a new taxpayer-funded commission of appointees required to gerrymander the boundaries of state legislative and congressional districts to favor either of the 2 largest political parties in the state of Ohio, according to a formula based on partisan outcomes as the dominant factor, so that state legislative and congressional districts will no longer be required to be compact, and counties, townships, and cities throughout Ohio can be split and divided across multiple districts, and preserving communities of interest will be secondary to the formula that is based on partisan political outcomes. Correct?
That's all correct, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, it's extraordinary.
So as the state representative from Michigan said, they cut up Detroit 22 times. Maybe they'll do that to Cincinnati. Maybe they'll do that to Lima. Maybe they'll do that to Marietta, and you'll have a district that runs from, Cincinnati all the way up to Allen or Hancock County.
Yeah, well, I think this is, if you're the Democrat map maker or the folks who are doing this, I would also say one of the maps submitted to the Redistricting Commission, submitted by this coalition of groups, did have a Senate map, Ohio Senate map, that started in Hamilton County and ended in Hardin County, which is Ohio Northern University for folks who don't know where that might be. But yeah, and likely the way that this is that places like Lima, Ohio, won't be necessarily included because it's too far from Dayton and Cincinnati, or Dayton and Toledo, where there are other Democratic voters. Although one version of a congressional map does take the city of Lima into downtown Toledo in a congressional district. But they'll go ahead and they're okay with those rural districts staying heavily Republican or being even more Republican. There will be pinwheel districts that go from downtown Cincinnati out into Butler, Warren, and Claremont County. And the folks who are going to win those in a Democratic primary are not going to be the people who live in downtown Cincinnati. But it's okay from the viewpoint of the people who are sponsoring this because they're going to be the kinds of Democrats they want. And this isn't an unusual process. This has happened in California. It's happened in Arizona. It's happened. The map that they drew a map, which they used in 22. The new Supreme Court in Wisconsin threw it out, hired their own map maker because their Constitution doesn't forbid the Supreme Court from drawing a map, where ours does. And they paired, roughly about 4/5 of Republicans in the same district. So it was clearly a partisan process. It's what you're going to see here if this passes.
You talk about the court drawing the map. Certainly under this plan, the court can draw the map. Jen Miller from the League of Liberal Misinformation in a Columbus Dispatch podcast a few months ago, the League of Women Voters, but I called them the League of Liberal Misinformation, said, but at the end of the day, there was no ability, no explicit ability for the Supreme Court to draw their own maps or get their own mapping masters. We have that now with this plan.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason, because the constitutional reform that we passed specifically said the Supreme Court shall not draw a district or any map. I mean, they're constitutionally forbidden. That's why they didn't have a map maker, and they knew it. Now, in sort of trying to back into it, they said, well, you guys draw the map the way we say. And we've tried to do that 2 or 3 times, and as we did, they said, well, not good enough.
They added new criteria.
Added new criteria.
They don't appear in the Constitution.
Yeah, and at some point, it was well, we're only going to, we don't even know what ultimately they will agree to. And that's why when you can't have a vote for your representatives and senators, the federal court steps in and imposes a map on you.
Well, I've had a few people ask me when I'm at the gym or just out, or my neighbors say, what's this whole gerrymandering amendment about? And I always boil it down to fixed outcomes, because it's proportionality, which is just another word for gerrymandering. No accountability, zero accountability, because of the panel that disappears forever and you, the voter, have nowhere to turn to. And it's an attack on democracy because it repeals the anti-gerrymandering amendments and good faith negotiations and limited splits of political subdivisions in cities and towns and neighborhoods that you, the voter, passed in 2015 and 2018. What would your minute-and-a-half long answer be, or what you've been telling people about the political outcomes over people campaign, what it really is and why it's a bad deal?
Well, number one, it requires political gerrymandering, no question about that. Number two, the folks who are going to be making the decisions exclude most of the people who have been involved in their community or their government, and it's going to be all the people, if you can find people who want to do that, those are the people who are going to be on this. And of course, they don't have any experience, they don't or knowledge about this, so they're going to rely on outside experts really to tell them what to do. You're not allowed to have any input except in a very specific way, so you're not allowed to talk to these folks. They can't be removed except by themselves. Their judgment can't be questioned in court. Only the proportionality is what you can sue on. So you can't even sue for the redress of your grievances, if you recognize that term. It's in the United States Constitution. They have an unlimited budget, which can't be questioned. It really sounds like something like, well, if that was our government, we all really wouldn't like that, because none of that is true about the Ohio General Assembly or the governor or even the Supreme Court, which are elected. And all the things we do at local level to make sure that there's public input. We have hearings on zoning, on all sorts of changes that may happen. You can go to your city council and be heard, or your county commissioners, all those things. None of that is true with arguably one of the most important decisions, maybe the most important decision every 10 years that the people of the state of Ohio have to make. And so I guess I'm not sure if that's longer than a minute and a half, but I would really encourage people to try to read this as long as it is, or at least look into it and say, and challenge people who say they're for it and say, well, here's what Matt Huffman said. Is that true? Now, they may say, well, I don't like Matt Huffman, but yeah, that's true. So I think that, like everything, the best voter is an educated voter.
Ohio Senate President Matt Huffman, thanks for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thanks very much, John.
Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.